Hey Unexplained Ones, this is Dr. Mounts, and thanks for tuning in to All Things Unexplained, where we talk about everything from Bigfoot to UFOs to astrophysics and everything in between. So if that sort of thing's for you, make sure to follow us wherever you podcast, along with a review and a rating. It takes a lot to get All Things Unexplained on the air, and this podcast is made possible by listeners like you. You can support the show by checking us out on Linktree at ATU Podcast. That's ATU Podcast. There you'll find links to all our socials. You can support us on Venmo. You can purchase your official All Things Unexplained merchandise, and you can even book us on Cameo. And now, let's get to the show.
All Things Unexplained, hosted by Dr. Mounts.
Let's face it, we were always ready to roll without him anyway.
CJ Derringer.
Ain't nobody perfect, right?
And Smitty Neebs.
I've never planned out hardly anything my whole life. I just freeball.
Featuring Cajun Man.
I'm just old nobody, somebody looking for somebody.
Previously on All Things Unexplained.
Well, 1967, I was a missile launch officer at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana. But we had control of 10 nuclear missiles, and sometime in the evening, I get the first phone call from my security guard, and he said they'd been seeing some strange lights in the sky, making no noise, flying very fast, stopping on a dime, reversing course, making 90-degree turns, noiseless. He said they are not aircraft, sir. We had reports in the city of Great Falls, in the newspaper at the time, of people seeing these strange lights and reporting them as UFOs. And he calls back, and this time he's screaming into the phone. He's frightened. You can tell by his voice he was very frightened. He said he had all the guards out with their weapons drawn. They were looking at a glowing red-orange object hovering above the front gate. It was a pulsating red-orange light. I told him, well, make sure you secure the facility. I was injured and he had to hang up, so he hung up the phone. All our missiles started going no-go or shut down. We also had two sites, the launch facilities where the missiles are actually located, about a mile or so away. We had incursion lights at two of the facilities, so they got close to the sites and saw UFOs hovering over those two sites.
Hello, all you unexplained ones out there. This is CJ Derringer, along with my co-host, Dr. Tim Mounts. We are thrilled to have all of you joining us. We are also so grateful to our guest this evening. Welcome to the show, Bob Salas. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, CJ and Dr. Tim. Thank you for inviting me.
Did you stay at this base much longer after this
Yeah,
incident?
I was there for another 2 years on crew duty. And we got no debriefing on what happened to us or the Echo flight. We were never told about any investigations that were ongoing, and there were investigations, I later found out. So I've written all this up, by the way, in my books.
Yes.
So I've done quite a bit of research. I got like I said, a lot of witnesses supporting these events that I've described. So, like I said, it's a very well supported case. I did
Yeah.
brief Arrow in February.
Oh, you did.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
So
okay. Because you were, yes, your incident was brought up by, I believe, a
yeah,
congressman of some sort at an initial one, and he was a little bit feisty to get yours researched. He was like, "What about this incident at Malmstrom Air Force Base?" And
yeah,
they
that
said,
was
"Oh, we don't, we have no knowledge of that."
One of our favorite
Congressman
quotes is from
Gallagher.
Arrow.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
Yes, there was a lot of that. So let's back up just a little bit before we dive into that. Okay, so almost 30 years go by. You have sat in silence with your knowledge of this event, and you decide, okay, I'm going public. Since then, you have been on every show that cares about UFOs in any way, shape, or form. You've written 3 books. We've got Fated Giant, which you published in 2005. We have the UFO Phenomenon, published in 2013, and coming out later this year, UAPs, the Nuclear Puzzle. Tell us a little bit about your writing and what you've done with each of these books.
Yeah, well, Fated Giant talks about the incident itself. It also has quite a few of the documents we received from. Hold on one second, please.
Sure.
Honey.
We can go ahead and mute him while he takes care of things.
Okay,
There
sorry.
we go. Oh, all
So-
good. We're constantly having noises in our background, I assure you.
Dogs, kids.
All the
Yeah.
things, yes.
Yeah, life goes on.
Yes, it does.
So, Fated Giant has quite a few of the documents that we received under the Freedom of Information Act, and it describes the incident, both the Echo and Oscar incidents, in detail. The next book primarily goes a little bit more into my incident, but also many other incidents related to what happened to us. Other UFO flyovers, nuclear facilities, and other stories. It also talks about the International UFO Cabal, or secret group that's operating on an international level, very well
UFO
organized.
Cabal?
Yes, Cabal.
I've never even heard of this.
Well, you got to read my book then.
Yes, I
It's
do.
true. I noticed the forward by Stanton Friedman.
Yeah.
Did you have an opportunity to speak to Stanton much?
Oh yeah, Stanton and I knew each other very well. Even from the beginning, when I first gave my first interview to the Great Falls Tribune, he happened to be in Great Falls while I was there. So we did talk many times. We were on UFO conferences together many times. Great guy. Too bad we lost him too early. But yeah, that book talks about this international group, which I'm convinced exists even today, that's holding these secrets. And I also talk about my own experience. I write about my own experience with abduction. And then the next book, which will be printed in November, is really a revision of that previous book, but I go into more details on each chapter, and I also bring everybody up to date as to what's been going on more recently.
Wonderful. And where can people purchase these books?
And you can purchase any of these books on Amazon.
Okay.
On
Great.
Amazon.
Under Robert Salas.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And I absolutely now need to go read that book. This sounds like a great mystery that I would just love to know more about. So you can count on me to be a purchaser of that one. Let's move forward a little bit. You've had this incident. You decide you're going to start speaking about it. How has this incident impacted your life and your career?
Well, I was after I started getting information from the Air Force under the Freedom of Information Act and writing those books and going on talk shows. At first, and my wife will confirm this, I thought I had done my job, by just talking about my incident, but this is something that just, I don't know. After that, I just became committed to making sure that the public was aware of these kinds of incidents. And I later met up with Robert Hastings, who wrote the book UFOs and Nukes, and realized there were many, many incidents. And then other witnesses came to me to write about their stories, and some of those are in that second book I told you about. So I just couldn't let it go. I feel, like I said, once I accept the fact that some of these have happened, write about them, talk to people, I feel responsible for informing the public, and so that's where I am today. I'm continually involved. It's kind of taken over my life.
Yeah, ever evolving for sure.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's only getting more prominent in our day-to-day life, especially in the media. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the abduction that you mentioned. Would you share? Are you willing to share?
Real quick, yeah, it's like I said, it's written up in that book. But 1985, I was staying with of course, my wife, and I had 2 children at a particular house in Manhattan Beach, California.
What? I was born in Torrance, at Torrance Memorial Hospital. Yeah, in 1985. So maybe your kids and I knew each other.
Maybe. My daughter was born in Torrance. Anyway, sometime in the middle of the night, I wake up. I see a blue light coming from the living room. We don't have any blue lights in the living room. And then I wake my wife up and ask her if she sees the blue light. She says yes. And I said, well, I'm going to have to go check it out. Could be a burglar. So I try to get up off the bed, and all of a sudden I'm paralyzed. I can't move. And I remember struggling intensely. This was not a dream, because I remember struggling intensely to get my mobility back, couldn't move. I turned to my wife and asked for help, and she now was unconscious. So next thing I realized is there's an odd, looks like someone in the bedroom door with a hood on. I can't make out the face. In fact, it seemed to me like it was blackened, or I just couldn't make out any face. And after that, I'm aware of what I think of are small children in the room. That's the way they seemed to me. And again, I don't recall what they looked like, except that they were small. Lifted off the bed and taken towards the window. I think to myself, these children won't know how to open the latch. I lock the window. They take me right through the window. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's what happened. Took me right through the window. Next, I'm apparently on board a craft, lying on a table. And I'm being shown a needle, a long needle with long bony fingers being held right in front of my eyes. They want me to see this needle. They say telepathically again, we're going to insert this into your groin area, and it's not going to hurt. Well, they started to do that. It was very, very painful. I expressed that. It was very painful, and all of a sudden the pain goes away. So presume they took a sample of sperm. After that, they set me up on the table. There were two small beings on either side of me that escorted me to an area that was built into the side of the craft, like a bench area. They sat me down, and they took me over to another area where appeared to be a doctor or nurse, turned me around and poked their fingers down my spine like that. That was it. Then they escorted me through a curved hallway. And again, I was not walking, I was floating around a curved hallway, and then bright white light, and I was back in my bed. The next morning, I didn't remember any of this, none of it, and neither did my wife. So we'll go forward, I think it was another 27 years. Yeah. And we were in Ireland. I was speaking in Ireland at a conference, and we were listening to another experiencer, and she mentioned a blue light filling her room before she was taken. And I turned to my wife and said, "Do you remember a blue light in our bedroom a long time ago?" And she said, "Yes." And that's the first time we'd ever talked about it at all. And that evening I got regressed, hypnotic regression. And that's where some of these facts came out. I've had 4 hypnotic regressions, and that's how I got some of these details.
Unpacking that one. A lot of people that we have talked to on this show that have had abductions or experiences in the moment were very terrified, and later on realized that actually there was nothing that these aliens were attempting to do to harm them, that in many cases they were possibly helping them, that they weren't coming with any malintention. What is your thought on what happened to you?
Well, I don't know that I could come to. I don't think they had any malintention per se. No. But what I do think is because I have looked into the abduction experience also. Obviously, because it happened to me. I'm interested in what's happened to other people. I've heard so many stories that make me believe that they are producing hybrids. Hybrid them and us. For what reason, I don't know. That's up to discussion, speculation. So I couldn't tell you why, but I'm convinced they are producing hybrids. And people, I don't think they try to harm people for the most part. I think people do get frightened, but people come back with some recall their experiences on board with much more detail. And I know they're taking children at a young age and maybe trying to educate them in some paranormal topics, kinesiology, things like that.
So, go ahead, Tim.
Well, I tell you, Bob, that is one thing that intrigues me, and I was hoping to get your thoughts on some current events, but we were lucky enough a couple weeks ago to talk to Travis Walton, who you might remember was the subject of
Yeah, I know
movies,
Travis.
Fire and Set Right, and he was a tremendous guy. We loved having him on the show. But
Hmm.
with all this current modern attention around UFOs, NASA, Aero, uh, government hearings,
Hmm.
television shows, etc. Well, at least in the public realm, they never acknowledge any sort of thing to do with abduction. What is your it's almost like they're whitewashing it
No,
for
they're not.
our ability to process it. What's your take on that?
They're not going to acknowledge it. I don't think they don't want to discuss the high strangeness, I guess, aspects of this phenomenon. But uh, the abduction phenomenon is very real. There's no question about it. Uh, and other things like crop circles. Uh, but I think our government wants to focus strictly on whether these are a hazard to air safety or national security, and that's going to be their focus. And you'll probably and that's all they're going to talk about. Uh, so it's going to be really up to the rest of us to bring these stories forward, in information forward, and make the general population of the world really understand the reality of some of these other aspects of this phenomenon. But I seriously doubt that our government is ever going to talk about it, even though I'm sure they know about it.
Hmm.
They've been studying this for at least 70 years after Roswell, and um, but there's some things that they just won't talk about.
Man, I have so many questions. I don't even know where where to go with them. And I want to also be very respectful of your time. We're so grateful to have you with us. Um, yeah, none of us know why they're hiding these things, and they obviously know that these things are happening. But one thing that you mentioned was getting the general public to talk about them, to come forward with their stories. How do
Mhm.
we convince people to do that? Because I know, like I mentioned before we started this show, when I got involved, people would ask me, "Are you really doing a show about UFOs?" And I was like, "Oh, yes. Why? Why?" And then they would say, "Oh, I've seen a UFO." And they would have never told anybody in their lives until this
Yeah,
moment because they felt it was a safe place for them. And I know that, if I had had an experience, am I going to tell anybody? I've got young kids who I want to have friends. And what are their parents going to think of me? This is a big hurdle.
yeah, it is a hurdle. There's still a stigma attached to talking about little green men or gray men, whatever color you want, um, and abductions. And uh, however, it does take courage. You have to overcome your feeling or your fears of telling your stories in order to get the word out there. Um, there are, for example, there's a group called CERO, which talks about, which brings abductees together. There are other groups that people can find where they can talk in private about these things, and then slowly they may come forward publicly. We now have a law under the new regulations of the National Defense Authorization Act. The most recent edition of that allows people with non-disclosure agreements like myself to come forward freely
Mm,
and not risk being prosecuted,
retribution, yes.
retribution. And so that kind of wording is now getting its way into federal regulations. So things are changing. Things are changing, which will help bring more people forward. But we do have to have more people come forward courageously, especially those that have supporting evidence, either documentary or other witness support.
Right. Yes, we absolutely do. And this show is a good place for it. We have a couple people
Yeah,
sharing their experiences in the comments right
sure.
now. Thank you for sharing those with us. Here's a question that Mark Smith shared with us, and we had written down to ask you as well. And we've asked this of many experiencers on our show. How has all of this affected your religious beliefs? A lot of people believe that there is a connection between the two.
I don't have, I mean, I shouldn't say I don't have religious beliefs, but I'm not associated with any religion.
Gotcha.
In fact, my beliefs center around a universal God, if you will. And obviously, the universe is packed full of places where life could exist. So we've got to accept that fact that life exists everywhere. And even the Pope came out and stated that essentially that certainly agreed that there's life outside of our own planet, and that is part of God's plan, right? It's all part of God's plan. So, but I understand that certain religions are going to have difficulties accepting this. But as more and more people understand this reality, I think that'll work itself out.
Yeah. Seems to drive people in one direction or the other,
Mhm.
or a nicely blended mix of the two
Mhm.
in terms of religion. Okay, Tim, you want to dive into some current things going on that we can get Mr. Salas's opinion on?
Well, if you don't mind, and we're joined tonight by Mr. Robert Bob Salas, witness to the famous Malmstrom Air Force incident, UFO case in Montana in 1967. And Bob, I'm real curious. I noticed, well, I just want to start with this. First of all of a sudden, we've got spy balloons traversing the country. The most recent one that we know about was shot not far from CJ and myself off the coast of South Carolina. And a big part of that story was that this spy balloon, which was as big as a bus, crossed over Montana. All right. And some people believe it had the capability of analyzing signals and other data from our top secret facilities in Montana. And of course, your story is integrally tied to Montana. What's your thoughts on the spy balloon situation?
Well, there's no question that we're being spied on, and I have no doubt that this balloon had equipment to detect signals. Now, everybody in the world, I'm sure, knows that we have missile bases in Montana. It's been well known for a long time. And so now all I can say is we need to follow through with this subject of what are we going to do with objects, including balloons, if that's what they are, or unknown objects. And so that's what was striking in the last Aero interview that was done recently with Senator Gillibrand, is she asked Dr. Kirkpatrick whether or not he had been contacted by DOD, who was studying the balloon question. And he said, well, he gave them their advice, but he was not involved in the decision making. So somehow we got to make that a connection where whatever he finds out is the right people get informed in DOD, and it doesn't look like that's happening right now. From my experience with giving my presentation to Aero, they were having difficulty coordinating with other agencies. They told me that outright on getting validation of these stories they're being, the interviews they're doing. So, yeah, it's a real problem. We have to come to the conclusions soon, whether these objects and which objects are a concern for national security and which are not. So,
Do you think that the government created this program as like a wag the dog sort of situation, that it's just a show? They've got some very intelligent minds working on these things over here while they're actually doing really big things over here, if they're having such trouble connecting with other government agencies.
To be continued.
You've been listening to All Things Unexplained. If you liked this podcast, please do give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review. If you would like to hear more All Things Unexplained, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Our show depends on the support of listeners like you. You can support the show by visiting our Linktree account at linktree.com/ATU podcast. If you can't get enough of us, please check us out at allthings-unexplained.com. A special thanks to our producer, director, sound mixer, editor, and the man who wears far too many hats. No, seriously, he has a lot of hats. Dr. Tim Mounts. Without you, we couldn't keep the lights on. Thanks for listening to All Things Unexplained.